Thank you for attending our webinar today on Microsoft Dynamics GP, the new version of GP, which we are going to dub as 2020. Our agenda, quick introductions. I'll talk about some technical compatibilities, and then Marvin Burnett is going to be showcasing the new Dynamics GP, and we'll talk about next steps. As you can see on the right side, Endeavour is a gold and silver partner for just about everything Microsoft, including Microsoft Dynamics GP, and we also support the new Business Central, Dynamics 365 CRM, Azure, Office 365, cloud products, and data analytics. We're now into our 30th year. We had our 30th anniversary just last month, servicing Microsoft Great Plains, and as I mentioned, GP, Business Central, Nav, CRM, Azure, Office 365, and all of the cloud products, looking down for implementations, upgrades, optimization, and support in the middle. Also have a variety of advisory services to help our clients get more out of their systems, whether that be a new implementation or a augmentation and enhancement of their current investments. We now have over 550 clients across Canada and the US and are continuing to grow. Offices in Toronto and Halifax, as well as London, Montreal, Edmonton, and Ottawa. So, Dynamics GP system requirements. Over the last few versions, there's been some changes. Luckily, with the latest version of Dynamics GP, which we're calling 2020, there's been no changes in the system requirements. So it will work with SQL Server 2014, though 2016 and 2019 are also compatible. Office 2013 and Office 365. The client will actually still run with Windows 7, though Windows 7 itself is off support, I believe, end of this year. So many will want to be upgrading any of the clients to Windows 10 just for other security considerations. So Microsoft Dynamics GP, as of the latest October release, is now on what they call a modern life cycle. This is similar to what it used to be years ago, and basically they just stopped using the year with the name. They have confirmed that there will be annual updates, and the official name is Microsoft Dynamics GP. Really nothing much changing. There's still going to be annual updates, and then spring update and December update, as there is now with service packs for predominantly Canadian US payroll. We're going to call the current version, just because we were previously had GP 2018 and 18R2. We're going to jump to GP 2020 and are recommending it for clients as early as January 2020. As with all new releases of Microsoft Dynamics GP, we like to wait a few months to allow all of the ISV and third-party add-on products to catch up and do their proper testing. Being ERP systems, we want to make sure that everything is stable and safe. So same information, just a different view. Stuff typically was coming out in the spring or the year before. Back in the 2010 and 2013, they were coming out kind of like a new car in the fall and ready for the following year. And so Dynamics GP 2020 just came out early October 2019, and the official name is going to be only Dynamics GP, but for ease of use, we're going to call it 2020. And ongoing enhancements, user-requested features and functions, and I'll let Marvin talk more about the nature of Dynamics GP being a mature product, which means it's safe, it's stable, no major got-you re-implementations, forced changes. Unfortunately, those that chose the Dynamics Nav platform are moving to Business Central. Business Central is based on Nav as an evolution of Nav. Those are having to do essentially re-implementations as they move up to the latest versions and into the cloud. Dynamics GP with this new modern life cycle is staying the same. It is not going away. We're thrilled as can be with these recent announcements I know there was rumors from competitors and other ERP systems, and we actually had some of our staff go down to the GPUG End User Group conference down in Florida, and the conference was about half of the over 6,000 people were all GP users there to learn what was new, what was coming, and to collaborate and talk about enhancing their investments and moving on. So with GP being a on-premise product, we can host it in a cloud with third-party cloud hosting in Canada, looking on the right side in that purple bubble, providing backups, the added security. It can sit on Azure as well, or we're finding majority of clients are choosing to keep Dynamics GP on-premise, but surrounding it with cloud applications and third-party applications. Canadian payroll is often one that is being outsourced and is cloud-based. Office 365 being in the cloud. Third-party add-ons and applications for convenience. Many of them are on-premise and continue to work inside of Dynamics GP. Others are extensions that have some cloud components. BI, budgeting, reporting, Profix, Vena, and other tool sets that we're recommending all have options for on-prem or cloud hosted for the data analytics. And then, of course, CRM. And Endeavour has some great out-of-the-box integrations that connect the new Dynamics 365 CRM cloud applications with GP and sharing data back and forth. Marvin, next.
All right, thanks, Scott. I'm Marvin Burnett. Looking at some of the attendees in the list, I think I've had a chance to chat with many of you guys. So just to give a little history about myself, that picture that you see on the screen is a much younger version of Marvin, where all my hair was red, a little more gray in it now, but I have had the opportunity to work with GP in a variety of its versions. I actually started working back in 1996 with Dynamics GP, and I believe Steve's standard joke is that I keep saying I'm 19, which would have put me at about 0 years old now to have started working with it. But over the years, I've actually had a really great opportunity to see the evolution of the product, see changes that have happened, see additions that have been made, and see, you know, I've actually even seen some of the suggestions that I've put forward to Microsoft and others that I've worked with to be implemented. So it's kind of really exciting when you see those things. So when Scott asked me to present what some of the new features in GP 2020 are, I really jumped at the opportunity because I do very much enjoy working with the product and am a little bit passionate about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dive right in and start talking about some of the new features and walk through it in the new interface. Now, before I get into the features, I just want to note that typically with a release, there's sort of 3 or 4 different pillars which are updated. There's the system updates, there's the financial or feature updates, and then in those they have workflow as well as something that they like to call the top feature requests. So that's what I'm going to be going through today to show you where some of these features and updates have happened. In regards to the system updates, I'm not going to actually go into SQL Server and those areas, but what they've done is they've actually upped the compatibility version. So this is just showing that Microsoft is investing in it. It's compatible with SQL 2019 as well as Windows Server 2019 and Office 2019. So those are some of the, I'll call it system or background enhancements that have happened in it. Now, in regards to a few more of the systems, let me just actually jump into GP now. So as you can see, I've jumped in here, and the interface itself has a very similar look and feel. They do this on purpose because what it does is it really gives the users, I think Scott referred to it as a mature product, it gives the users that have been working with it for a long period of time the ability to upgrade and still not be greatly impacted of a new update. What it does do though, and what you're going to see, is it's added a lot of features and functionality. So when we go into the different windows, you'll see where some of these features and functionality are. I'm going to first move over into data options and smart list. Now this is something that I've been requesting for quite some time, as well as I know others in our office have. I'm going to move over into Smart Lists here for a second. I'm just going to pop this window up. Now, a couple things that you're going to see is I'm going to open up a account transaction list. One of the features that happened in a previous version is that it gave you a little bit more green space or a little bit more room on the page. So it actually added this feature to minimize the shortcut toolbar. So for people that are on older versions, if you saw the shortcut toolbar disappear, this is a great feature. But what it's doing is that's one of the old features. However, today what I'm going to touch on is I have the ability now in my search criteria to say, you know what, if I'm going to go do a search on transaction date, you know how you used to have the is between, you could type in January 1st to December 31st or whatever the date was, or if you want January 1st to January 31st or the month or whatever, they've actually added a new feature here that I can say is equal to, and rather than pick a date, down at the bottom of the list, you're going to actually see next month, prior period next year. So the months are based on the calendar. The periods are based on your fiscal calendar. So this is a great new feature because if you're going to create a smart list and diarize it so that it shows up on your homepage and you want it to look at the prior month, I don't have to constantly go back in and change the dates that I want it to search on. I can actually just say next month, prior month, so on and so forth. So really love this feature that they've added on that basis. And when it looks at the prior month, it's going to be January 1st to 31st or October 1st to 31st. I guess we're talking October right now, whereas prior period would be period 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. So that's a really nice feature. Now, continuing on with the system features that they've added, I'm just going to close out a smart list for a second. I'm going to go into the user access setup. So this is where your system administrator is going to be going in and setting up users and giving them access to the different companies. Now, I'm going to go over to my navigation pane over on the left-hand side here. I'm going to click on my user access here. Now, under my user access, I can select any of the people. So if I select Matt here from our office, you're going to see one of the things I now have is the ability to sort not just by company ID, but by company name. I love this feature. I remember working years ago with an organization that had, I think it was 20-some companies, and we started getting into this numbering convention with Zs and stuff like that, so they changed the sequence. What this does is it gives us the ability to change the sort option. So really great that we have that. This is going to help out the administrators of the system quite a bit when they're looking at granting and taking away security from different people to different companies. I'm going to keep on this window because the next point is what they've added is the include or exclude inactive users. So if I remove this check mark, if there's anybody that's active or inactive, so if Matt here was inactive, if I remove that, he's going to disappear from the list. Or, sorry, if I click on that or click off of it, he would disappear from the list. This is a great feature also because if you're trying to keep history of all the users that have been there, you can inactivate them so that they can no longer access the system, but you want to see who's been there. On a side note, one of the things I want to mention here, because I have had a chance to work with a lot of different organizations, this inactive feature actually started rolling out into the feature releases a number of years back. So I'm just going to actually jump over into customers, for example. So this isn't new in this version, but it's new in one of the previous versions. I know a lot of people that I talk to don't realize that. So when you actually do a search on either customer ID, or if you're doing a search on vendor ID, or if you're doing a search on items or what have you, when you do a drop-down here, you can actually say exclude inactive customers. That's going to change your list and your view on this list to say if there's inactive, drop them off the list so I don't see them. They'll still be in the database. The other thing that's really nice is I can say set as default view. What that's going to do is next time I go in, even if I log out of GP and come back in, that's my default view. And when I do a search for my customers, no longer am I searching on all my customers. I am only looking for the customers in the inactive list. So really nice feature there. So if you look here, it remembered in exclude inactive customers. Works with vendors, items, a variety of different attributes there. So I'm also going to move into a little bit more on the system. So this system features, this actually deals with a little bit on the report groups. So at month end, I always try and sort of relate a story to what I'm going to be showing. At month end, you get a lot of financial people that go in and they print specific reports that they do for month end, whether it's trial balances for, maybe accrual accounts for, AR, AP, different things like that. Well, what you're able to do is you can actually set up report groups. So report groups are not new. They've been around for quite a few years. However, what is new is inside the report group. So I'm just going to go into my financial report groups here. So let me just click on that. And under the financial report groups, I can actually, how you can set up your trial balances with a variety of different reports. Well, inside my account report groups, if I pick up my accounts, for example, I can actually pick up all the different areas that I do reports in. These are a list of the reports that I have, and I can insert it into a group. Then I can save it. So under my report groups here, I've got one already set up here called End of Month Reports, where I went through the different categories and inserted these and saved. The new feature is that I'm able to actually save more than 32 reports in a group. So prior, you were only able to save 32 reports. Now you can actually save more than 32 reports in a group. So great little feature there for people that are using the report group functionality. So that covers over some of the system enhancements. Now, I sort of mentioned that there's a couple different pillars that they work off of. There's the system where we've got the SQL compatibility, the Office, and the operating system compatibility. And there's what's called financial enhancements, or feature. I call them feature enhancements. So this is where we're actually going through and seeing the application, the day-to-day use of the application and updates that they've done to the application itself. Now, one of the first things that I want to touch on is the inside the payables transactions. Now, I'm just going to move over on my purchasing or on my navigation list over to purchasing here. Excuse me. And as I click on purchasing, I seem to have sharing a screen right now on our server, and it seems to have locked up for a second. This is great when you're demoing something. I really love this. Not quite a feature of it, but I think it's a feature of my machine right at the moment. Let me, oh, there we go. Just had a little hiccup on the connection. Alrighty. So when I go in to do a transaction entry, such as a payables transaction, what you're seeing here is, a long description. So typically, or in the past, you've had this description here that takes, I think, up to 30 characters. Now, I remember years ago, there was a client that we were working with that actually wanted to extend this description. Microsoft quoted it. It was several $1,000s to add, and to add a table in the database, so on and so forth. Well, what they've done is they've actually baked that into the functionality now. To be able to turn this on, what you'll simply want to do is under purchasing here, you're going to go down and you're going to touch on the setup under purchasing. You're going to open that up, and you'll see that there is now a checkbox that says Enable Long Description in Payables Transaction Entry. As soon as you turn that on, it is actually going to enable the long description. Now, it's great that we have a long description in Payables Transaction Entry because we can now record a long description. A couple things that we can do with this is we can pull it into Smart List because this is a long description. Obviously, I keep repeating that name. So it is a field in the database that is available inside of our Smart List. But we can also now pull it into different reports. So for example, if we were pulling it into a payables inquiry, if we're doing a check, stub, top, bottom, whatever the different versions of the check are, we can actually pull those in. So I'm just going to actually quickly, Tool, Customize, Report Writer, jump into Report Writer for a second. And as this is taking a second to jump into Report Writer, what you're going to see is when I pull up one of the checks, it's going to, and I'll just give this a second to pull up the check. There we go. And I'll just pop into Report Writer. And as I go into reports, you'll see under the check here, if I open this up, if I look at my layout here, so here's the layout of my check stub. And what I have the ability to do now is you'll see that the field has been added as long description 2. So that's the field that you can just drag and drop as part of the remittance advice on the check stub or the different reports that I was talking about. So I'm just going to move back into GP here. So that's the long description. So the next function or the next feature that they've added is actually just a more of a view feature that they've updated. So this is where we go into the fiscal periods. So the fiscal periods are where you define your calendar. I talked about the Smart List where we had the periods or months that we can say look into? Well, I'm just going to actually jump over to the fiscal periods now on my calendar. I'm just going to give this a second to refresh. So when I move down into my administration tab down along my navigation list here, I am going to go under my company functionality. So I'll just enter my system here and I'll go into fiscal periods under company. Right off the hop, what it's done, or what one of the features is that it's actually expanded this window so you can see the whole window now. It used to only cut off at period 6 and you'd have to scroll down. When I was setting up New Year's, to me that was a big pain in the behind. One of the other things that I just want to touch on here, so the feature is that it's expanded the window or created it into an expanded view. One of the other things that I just want to touch on here that I've seen a lot of different organizations that have gone in. If you're doing inquiries on the general ledger, so if you go inquiry financial GL, you'll see period 1, period 2, period 3. You are actually able to go in here and you can update these. So you can actually set the name, or January-period 1, February-period 1. It's going to have two effects. One, it's going to update the period name so you can see them here. The second is this actually will tie into Management Reporter. So if you're doing your financial reports to Management Reporter, it's going to update the names in there. So the feature is that the window is bigger, but a little add-on here that is if you're doing an inquiry, don't forget to change those names when you create a new year, because when you pull up that account, you'll see January, February, and the other ones left as I hadn't changed those, but nice little update there. Now, the other thing that they've added on the general ledger side is a nice little feature on showing who posted a transaction right in the inquiry screen. So I'm just going to close out of here for a second. When I create a journal entry, so I'm just going to pop open General Journal here. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm not going to actually key in a journal entry. I'm going to go back to one of the old features that happened, and I'm going to grab my sample journal entry here out of Excel. So when I pull up the sample journal entry from Excel, so there we go. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into the journal entry. So I'll just go, I'm just going to hit paste here. So what that's done is it was a quick journal entry, and I was able to copy and paste from there. Now, what I'm able to also do is just a sample entry. So 3452, I'm just going to hit post here and move this along. So that's great that I've hit post. I can close out of this transaction. Oh, cancel. I think I missed the post button. So 3452, and I'll just cancel that. Now, the feature that they've added is when you're doing an inquiry on the journal entry, so if I go my journal entry inquiry window here, and I go 3452, you can now see that this is the user who posted it. So in the past, we've had a lot of questions where people, I want to see the user who posted it because I need to know who did that, so on and so forth. Well, they've actually surfaced that and shown it right on the screen. So that's a really nice feature that they've added. So I posted it as SA, but if it was Marvin or Matt, as I was using as an example before, it would have actually shown Matt up here. The next area that they've added functionality to is in the fixed assets. So sort of following along those general ledger side, I'm going to actually go into the fixed assets here. And what we have the ability to do is we can actually add a class ID to a fixed asset transfer. So when I first thought of this, or when I first read this, I thought, what scenario do we have going on here that you'd want to add a class ID to the fixed asset transfer? Well, I'm just going to go down into my fixed assets here. So let me just go under my cards here, under my general. And if I pick up a fixed asset, you can see my office, book, and so on and so forth. I'm going to actually make one jump back here. So on the setup of fixed assets, I'm just going to move down to my setup of fixed assets here. In fact, I'm going to open this window a little more so we can see it in detail. I have a book and I have a book class. So if I'm looking at my class ID being updated, I can say my book ID is internal, my book class ID is auto. Well, maybe I want to track computers to the different departments. So there's a 100, 200, and 300 here. If I go back here, I can say that when I'm looking at my class, my book, and my class ID here, so when I see my 100, 200, and 300, and I look at my account class groups, I can see that I've coded these to the different departments. So if I was transferring assets from one, if I was doing a fixed asset transfer, I now have the ability, so if I just pop over into the transactions here, and I go into the transfer, you can see that when I do a lookup on my asset ID, and I'm just going to pick up asset number 15 here, monitor, I can move it from the computer group. If I'm moving it from this physical location to another physical location, so maybe I have one of these monitors that I'm moving over, I can also say, you know what, because this is moving from a admin to an accounting location, I can say change this to class comp, so computers-200, and as soon as I hit the transfer here, oh, this is a required field, is master asset ID. Well, as soon as I hit the as soon as I hit the transfer here, what will end up happening is it's going to actually roll down the changes to say not only is this moving from one physical location to another, but it'll also update the GL account in the background. So I don't have to worry about doing this on an individual basis. So this is great if I'm doing it one-off, but I also have the ability to do the mass transfer. So when I do a mass transfer here, I have the ability to roll down those class IDs as well on the mass transfer when I do a mass transfer on my fixed assets. Another function that they've added here, so along the same lines of financial, is the document attach. So as hopefully many of you are using, the document attach function has been added, I think it was around GP 2013. And since then, every update that they've done, they've added document attach functionality into a variety of different windows. Well, now what they've done is they've actually added it into the bank rec windows. So if I go into my deposit, my bank deposit entry here, so what you'll see here is now we have the attach button. So that is great. So as I'm doing bank transactions, if I had like the original source or if this was a wire payment or something along those lines, what I do have the ability is to attach that PDF or that screen image or whatever it was that I was pulling from, and I can have that as a flowing through with the document. So when I drill back on it, I can see that document or see that document that was attached. So that's a great function. And you'll see that this has been added not only in the bank deposit window, but it's also been added in the bank transaction window, the bank deposit entry window, and the bank transaction entry zoom window. So the inquiry windows that are associated to these transactions. So not only can I attach it here, but I can also, let me just do a checkbook ID here, and flex benefits, and pay to Marvin, and for anyone who knows my spelling, they'll know that I can spell very poorly. Well, I can add that, so 100 here, and I can set up the offset here, but I can go into my attach and throw in the attachment there. Excuse me. So that gives us the ability to attach not only in bank deposits, but bank transactions as well now. And we have the visibility on the drill back on the inquiry screens. Now, excuse me. So what we also have is inside the payable side, we have a new visibility or a visual cue for EFTs on vendors. So a number of years back, GP changed their licensing model, and what ended up happening is when they went to this business-ready licensing model, people that were on GP all of a sudden got a whole bunch of new functionality. Years ago, as I mentioned, I've been using GP for quite a number of years. You used to have to buy EFT as a separate module. So anyone that's on, I think, a version after 2013 or 2013 or greater has EFT as a functionality. If I go under purchasing here, just to do a quick jump on this, you'll see that when I go under my vendor, I have the ability to say on ACE Travel. Under my address, I have my EFT. So from here is where I can identify if this is an EFT vendor with their banking information, so on and so forth. So when I create an EFT record on a vendor and I make it active, what it's going to do is it's going to tell you, you know what, when you're doing your payment processing now, rather than doing a check, you'll want to do this as an EFT. Now, if I was doing my select check functionality, I could go through and select everything from one checkbook or from another checkbook. Or if I was going through under my edit check batch, so if I just open up under purchasing here, or I should say edit payment batch, aging me a little bit by calling it edit check batch here. If I pull up my sample checks that I was doing here, what you're going to see is a couple different things. You'll see that there is a visual cue now. This visual cue here indicates that this is actually an EFT vendor. So I can choose my EFT vendors from here, or I can know that this is an EFT vendor. So if this is not an EFT run that I'm trying to do, don't include those. The other thing that I want to mention here is you do have the ability, as you're selecting different payments or different checks to do check runs on, you can say which ones you want to select, and you'll see the values change here. I can resort any of these columns. As well, I have the ability to add and remove. So if I didn't want to see the vendor ID, but I wanted to see the vendor name and the class ID, I could easily just click on those, and I can add class ID, resort by class ID, by name, or what have you. So that adding the columns was a feature that was added a little while ago, but now what we have is the ability to see that this first travel company is a EFT vendor. The next thing that we have is for those people that are using the payables functionality is we have the ability to show the check number in the apply, or sorry, not on the payables, on the receivables, is showing the check number on the apply sales document window. So in the past, when you were going to the sales and you were going into cash receipts here, you'll see that I have a cash receipt. I can enter the cash receipt. I have a receipt number, so I call that the audit trail code number, but I also have an amount, checkbook, and a check number here. When I'm doing my cash receipt and you're doing a payment and you're doing a check payment, you can put in what the credit card number is or the check number. Well, this number now, if I'm going in to do a separate apply, so if I go down into my apply sales transaction window, and I do a quick lookup on Adam Park, so let me just go find Adam Park here in my list, and I do a lookup on my document, I'm going to see payment number, but as I look at this, you'll see that this check number is added here. I love this feature because if you're going back to apply because the customer has sent in the check and you have to go into the apply because maybe the invoice hasn't been posted or whatever, you're often looking up not by the audit trail code number, which was what the default was before, but you're often looking up by the check number of the payment that they gave you. And now you have that visual. So I can see that it's the 125542 and I can start applying it to the different invoices that are outstanding on this customer. I'm now going to move into sort of the next area of features or functionality that's been added. So this is where I'm going to be moving into the workflow enhancements. So workflow was added into GP actually quite a few years ago. It was leveraged on SharePoint services, which not a lot of people initially adopted. And then Microsoft discovered, not a lot of people have adopted MOS or Microsoft Office SharePoint Server, which is where the workflow was tied into. So then they actually incorporated it right into GP. So the first early versions of SharePoint were thrown in first early versions of workflow were thrown in on, I think it was GP 2013. And then with 2013 R2, they added a little bit more functionality. And 2015 R2, so they continue to add a lot of functionality. Now, today what they've added is if I just go under my administration tab, so to be able to see my workflow, I'm going to go under my company. So this is going to be company specific. So under administration, I'm going to go to company. I'm going to open up my workflow. So with my workflow here, I'm going to open up my workflow maintenance. So this is where I actually have the ability to see the different workflows and what's being set up. You'll see that I have a variety of different functional areas. When Microsoft rolled out workflow first, their focus was really on purchasing. And it made sense because, most organizations, they want workflow and approval set up around that whole, money leaving the building. That's how I usually phrase it. So they focused a lot on the purchasing side. So you'll see the payables, the purchase order, the requisitions, even down to the vendor approval. So these are some of the old enhancements. Now, what they added in this version is they've actually gone back one step, or not back one step, that really sounds bad, but they've gone one step further down to the source and they've said, you know what, we need to add more security around users. So what they've done is they've actually added a user approval and a user security workflow. So user security approval and a user approval workflow. If I open up the user security workflow, what you'll actually see here is this is giving me the ability to set up workflow and approvals around setting up security on a user. So when I actually do this, if I've changed any of the security, so if they've edited or added user security, I can say that, you know what, this is either requiring, conditions are met. So if, they've changed or added to a company, or they've added a user to a certain company or to a certain role, you can actually pick this up and set up a scale or a layering so that it says that if they've added to this company, send it to this manager. If they added to another company, send it to another manager. Or, in my view, is if you've changed security on somebody at all, before that security can roll down, action is always required. In this case, the lead singer of U2 gets to do the approval funnel. The next area that they did was user workflow. So on the user approval workflow, and you'll see here, I've set one up, approve all new users. So you can say, under my process, I have all these roles. So these roles are either tailored or the out-of-the-box roles that came with the system. Or I can say that these are the roles that I've customized, so ESI underscore whatever for Endeavour's security model. Now, when I create a brand new user, I go in and I can say I want to create a new user. And then I want to give that user access, whether it's to a company or to a role. That would be the user security. However, before that, if you want to set up an approval now that says I want to approve users, so somebody can go in and create a user, but before that user is approved to be able to give security or what have you, they may have to go through a workflow to say that, you know what, approval has to be set. So you can create the new user, but before you can grant any security, we're going to stop it at that point and require that logical step. And once again, we can either do it when action is required or action is always required. And in this case, this action is assigned to one of the other members of U2, Larry Mullen Jr. So those are the areas that we've got on the security. Now, we also have up at the top here, security role approval and security task approval. So these are users down at the bottom that I talked about, so before you can assign securities to users. Now, what happens if you want to make sure that I've set up the security and I don't want it to change, or I want to make sure that the security doesn't change? So rather than allowing somebody to bypass that and say, well, I'm just going to change security and give that person without having to give them a new role. Well, what we've got now is the ability to set up user roles and security tasks. So a task is what gets assigned to the roles. So the task is that granular item that says the person can go into payables transaction entry, or they can do invoices or computer checks, or whatever it is that they're allowed to do. So you can set up security, so before a task gets adjusted, it can go through a security function, and then that task gets assigned to a role. So before that task can be assigned to a role and the role is adjusted, we have security on that role as well. Now, in regards to the security, you saw that I actually worked on my security based on my company setup. So inside the company setup, you can say, here's what my security model is. Well, you may have more than one company. Well, this would be a gigantic pain if I had to go through each and every task and set it up in each company individually. Well, what we have the ability to do is we can actually export and import. So I can take these new workflows that I've created, I can export them, and then I can jump into the other company and import them. So nice and easily, I have the ability to say, I want to customize it for either a specific company, or I can take these workflows that I've set up and I want to export it out and bring it into the other companies as well. So it's just a nice little quick export-import function. So if I highlighted this, I can hit export. It would allow me to export it out to a location. And then if I jump into my other company, I can actually import it back into that other company. So nice little functionality there just to make the administrator's life just a little easier on the setup side. Change approver for workflows. So we have the next one is if I had active workflows. So you'll see here, if I go back in, and I'm just going to go Tools, set up, or sorry, I'll go back to the administration. I'll go through the workflow functionality here. I have some active workflows here. So maybe this is the step one to test if a PO is greater than $5,000. Well, this is set up to Matt. Well, maybe Matt goes on holidays and he wants to be able to delegate, or he wants to pick and choose which ones that he wants to delegate to. So from this, I can go in and I can take a look here also on this level that it's greater than $5,000. And what I can do now is I can actually go in, and if I look on my main palette here, I have Edit Workflow Approver. So Edit Workflow Approver gives me the ability to say, I'm just going to do it based on, rather than Manager, I'm going to say Workflow Approver here, I believe. If I do a lookup on Adam, and I'll just go OK here. And if I look for and choose Adam and redisplay, let me hit redisplay here, you'll see that I actually have one for Adam receivables batch that needs to be approved because he's being set up as the approver here. Well, I can actually say, you know what, I need to delegate this to Matt, and as I'm as an administrator, I have the ability to do this, so I can say okay to Matt here. I can mark this off and hit process. So what that's done is it's saying that, you know what, if I'm not available to approve this, I have the ability to see all the batches or all the different active workflows that I have to approve. I can see them in a list here. I can mark them off who I want to delegate them to, and I have a nice, quick and easy way to process and delegate them off to different people. So if I'm not available to approve, they could be available and they can do the approval for me. Now, to go back into the enhancements here, on the vendor approval enhancement, you'll see that one of the functions or one of the features that have been added is, now let me just hit cancel here, I'll hit clear here, is the ability to actually approve if a vendor has, if a vendor status has changed. So on the approvals before, so if I go under workflow maintenance here, if I go under vendor approval here, and I can go here and I'll say vendor approval, action is required. One of the drop downs is that if their status has changed. So if I've changed a vendor, so let me just cancel here. If I've changed a vendor from hold to off hold, so if I just go back into my purchasing just to show you what I'm talking about, if I've moved a vendor from hold to off hold, I can actually fire a workflow to say, you know what, if this is one of the statuses I've changed, I can now require an approver to, you know, approve before they will become an active or inactive vendor now. So that's great. I'm now going to move over into what is typically called the top feature request. So as Scott mentioned earlier, you know, Microsoft is, as I call it, or as Scott called it, a mature product. What does that mean? Well, it means that, you know what, it's been around for a while. I was going to make a joke about myself and my wife referring to me as being old but not mature, but in this case, Microsoft or Dynamics is mature. And it's got a lot of core functionality built into it. It has a purchase order module, it has a payables module, it has a job cost module, it has, you know, all these other manufacturing modules. So it has all this functionality. So what they do is they've given the opportunity for end users to actually submit requests for changes that they would like to see happen. So what that is their top feature request. So I will make sure that Scott, although I'm sort of putting him on the spot right now by saying this, I'll make sure that Scott sends out this link. What this is Microsoft's ability to say, you know what, you have the ability to vote on what you want as a feature release for GP. So you'll see under here there's 49 requests, or 32 requests for sales order processing, 36 requests for purchase order processing. You can actually break down into these further, and you can either make a suggestion for a new feature release, or you can vote on the feature releases. So the ones that receive the most votes, or the ones that are, you know, I'm going to say logical, and if they're logical, then they get more votes. What ends up happening is these become new features in the software. So let me just minimize this. And I believe actually, I don't think it was this release, but I think it was 2018 R2, one of the feature releases that Brittany had put in as one of the suggestions, because one of our clients had come back and said this would be great if this functionality was in place. It actually became one of the feature releases in 2018. I think it was 2018 or 2018 R2. But in regards to feature releases, what we have is a variety of different things that have been added to the functionality based on vote. So in this case, one of the top feature releases was the ability to copy report options. So I'm just going to go under my financial here. And if I go into my report, so I'm just going to go under trial balance here, what you're going to see is if I pick up Marvin's month-end report and I hit modify here, well, this is great. If I hit Scott's, oops, sorry, Scott, I spelled everybody's name wrong. Scott's month-end report. Well, you know what? He can actually copy Marvin's month-end report. So I want to copy from the drop-down of Marvin's month-end report and hit OK. All the areas and attributes that Marvin had have now been copied over, and Scott can easily, rather than going through and clicking all these or all the different fields, he can go through and say, you know what, my care is about the bank, and I'll just insert this and save that. So all the attributes of the first one are now carried forward to Scott's month end. He can adjust it accordingly. So he has an exact replica and update it as required. So great little feature there. I know working with GP for as long as I have created a lot of reports, and I know that copy feature would have been awesome. The other thing that I really love, and I actually voted for this quite a while ago, or actually not quite a while ago, I thought about it for quite some time, but I voted for it on the when 2018 was rolled out, was in the item stock inquiry. So if anybody's ever worked with me, you probably have noticed that if I am looking up something on inventory, I always go right off the hop to my inquiry window, my 100 XLG. So I'm going to pick up this item. I could have also done a lookup here to pick up the 100 XLG. I personally love this window because it tells me so much. It has the on-hand allocated. If I want to drill back on the allocated, I can see what's allocated. If I want to see down to a warehouse level, I can scroll down through all of my different warehouses here, and I can see I got 40 but 35 available inside my warehouse called Warehouse. What I do next is I actually love hitting the go-to and then going to the item stock inquiry. The item stock inquiry now gives me what I call my FIFO schedule. So right from the bottom, how does my 40 get made up? Well, there was a sale of 8 that took it from, 38 to this. There was a purchase order receipt that brought in 10 that brought it up to 40. I can drill back on this document. I love this window. I probably should get to the feature. I know Scott's probably sitting there going, get to the feature, Marvin. Well, what they've done is they've actually added sort features here. So in this, I can actually do a drop-down and say sort by document type, document number, or document date. So if I sort by document date, I can resort the date. If I sort by document type and hit redisplay, I can sort by here's all my adjustments together, all my receipts together. So if I'm looking at it and going, well, what happened? How did all these sales happen? I can easily change the sort by. I love this feature. I remember voting on this because it was one of those great features. And when I hit the redisplay, so if I'm going by document date here, I can also say, you know what, I want to see everything for 2027. So my date sync 2027 0101 to 2027 1231. And when I hit redisplay, I now have just the transactions that happened that year. So great little feature on that basis. I love it. I can also now, so for those of you that are on the sales side, on the sales side for inventory, if I'm just going to go over to my inventory card here and pick up my item, what I have the ability to do is I can exclude inactive items from my price list. So I'm working with the standard price list here. If I go over to my inventory report, so let me actually just jump over to my inventory report. So I'm going to click on my item here. If I, oh, that's not reports, that's inquiry, Marvin. If I click on my item here on my reports, I'm just going to click on the modify here. I now have inactive items. So it's one of the little check boxes I can add. So if I don't want a list that's massive because maybe I have 5,000 items, but only 200 of them are active because I want to keep all that history in the drop down because they may come active again, well, I can say exclude my inactive items. I can also now, as one of the other feature releases, I can minimize transactions when the go-to is selected for a PO that exists. Now, the first time I read this, I had to read it about 3 or 4 times because it was like, what the heck does that mean? Well, I'm going to go back to one of the earlier points that I talked about. When the Business Ready license was rolled out, people got a lot more functionality because they just said, this is just part of the Business Ready license. One of the pieces that people got functionality was on the purchase order generator. So purchase order generator, let me just jump over to inventory for a second. The purchase order generator is the ability to say when I am working on an item, so let's say my 400 processor, under my item resource planning, I can say when I'm looking at my site warehouse, I want to use purchase order generator and I want to use some order point quantity. So it's going to set up a suggestion for me to say I want to reorder, if it gets below 10, I need to order up to 50, or however I'm doing this with my PO generator, I can leave it at 0. So if I get, over allocated in stock, it'll do a suggestion for a PO. Now, what I can do is when I go into my purchase order generator here, so I'm going to click on purchasing here, click on purchase order generator. So purchase order generator isn't a new feature, but what is when I hit suggested purchase orders and I select, I want to choose my 400 processor here. Oh, I can't choose that yet because I have not picked a supplier for it, so I'm going to pick Ace Travel. So I was going to say, all right, when you order from Ace Travel, I'm going to do a suggested purchase order here. So on this, it's suggesting because of my quantities to order 3 of them from Ace Travel. Now, when I hit Generate PO, and I can do either 1 or I can do 2, and when I hit Generate PO here, what's going to go, and it's going to pop up a message, and it's going to say, well, what do you want to do with this? Now, this is great, but if you use this PO generator all the time, I hate this message. I want it to stop popping up. Now, I have the ability to say, what do I want to do? So with that pop-up, I can say, the background, I want to minimize this, minimize all this, select these, and then I can just email these off to the supplier. So to streamline things, rather than have all those messages pop up and it just goes straight to this window, what I have the ability to do, and let me just go back into my purchasing tab here, and when I go into my setups, I'm just going to minimize this, and I'm going to open up my setup. And when I go to purchase order processing, I have the drop down here that says show the message. Well, I have it set to show message so that you can see the message on it. But if I say don't show message and just open up the new PO, or don't show the message and don't open the PO, those are the options that I have. So it's just streamlining and making the process of getting that PO out a lot faster. So that's how I can choose what I want to do. The other thing that they've added is in Smart List. So one of the other features that was one of the top votes that was added into the functionality was inside Smart List. Now inside Smart List here, I have the ability to add inactive columns as well as show and select all columns. So a new field that was added to Smart List is the inactive columns field. So if I go under inventory here and items, what you'll be able to see here is under the column and add inactive. Where is inactive? There we go, inactive. So I actually have the ability to add that column. It was one of the columns that weren't added before, and I have the ability to say yes, show active, or no, show inactive. So there you go. I also have inside here, I have the ability to show the user ID in the item master table. So I'm going to stick with Smart List for a second, and I'm going to show here's my item master table. And what I can do here is if I add an additional column, and I'm just going to go add here. Now I can do a search, or I can just select user ID here. And what you're going to see here is I'm just going to re-click on this. So you can see I was just playing with the 400 processor, and you can see that the last user who did an update or created the record was SA. So it's actually giving me a last user ID. So last user who updated the record. In this case, I was the last user who updated the record. But if I create a brand new record, which I did earlier today with something called Progress Bill, you'll actually see that it's recording that as well. So it has a lot of functionality, especially if you're trying to do some control on who made changes to these items. you now have the visibility here to see who the last user ID was. And that was, they also added a piece of functionality to the web client. I don't have the web client on my machine, but it's actually copy and paste for the journal entries that you saw me do in the journal entry on the desktop client. They added that to the web client as well. So that's a quick summary of a number of the features and functionality that's been added to Dynamics GP, or as Scott mentioned, what we're going to call it for the time being is Dynamics GP 2020. So Scott, maybe I'll pass it back over to you, sir. Scott, are you there? This is going to be one of those
Yes, I
moments
am.
where Scott cuts out Marvin talking randomly.
No, never. Can you put up on full screen, please? So thanks very much, Marvin.
Oh, look at that.
We're really just on our the next steps as we wrap up. If you have questions, if you want to talk about upgrades, you want to talk about strategy, you want to talk about additional training or implementing some of these new features and functions, please reach out to our team. Trish is always available to help field your questions, as is James and Steve. You will also, see in parts of Microsoft, especially if you go through their website, that they're pushing heavily on Dynamics 365 Business Central. We can assist any clients that want to move to that new platform, but it is a new platform. It is a new implementation, a cloud migration plus new processes, new training, new everything. So those that are happy with Dynamics GP and GP is working for you, we recommend planning for your GP upgrade in the coming months or coming years, and we are here to help and support you whatever direction and whatever your needs may be. So with that said, thank you very much for everyone. We're going to wrap it up at the end of the hour, give you back a few minutes to your day, and we'll open up a... Yep.
Just noticing one of the attendees, David, had asked a question in regards to determining what version of GP you're on. So sure. David, just to give you a hand with that, if you're inside GP, there's going to be a couple different ways that you can see this. Yeah, sure, I'll just continue there. Typically, when you log into GP, the splash screen will actually have a version number in the bottom left corner as you're logging in. But you can also go up into the Help and About Dynamics GP. Now, inside this window, you're going to actually see version numbers. So in this case, you're seeing that this is the October 2019 release, which is 18.2.10.13. So that is one quick and easy way to find out the version number of GP that you're on. So hopefully that helps out David in his question. Sorry about that, Scott.
No problem. I was just about to say, if anyone has any other questions, type them into the question window, and we have Marvin for a few more minutes.
And I see Robert asked a question in regards to using SharePoint with workflow, and what are the advantages of using SharePoint with workflow. So Robert, over the years, the version of SharePoint that would be available to be tied into GP is actually MOS, so Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. So there's a difference between if you have SharePoint, you can download a copy of SharePoint Services and SharePoint Server. Now, I am not a price guy, and most people, if you talk to me on the phone, you'll know that I make up numbers. But there is a huge difference in price from free to SharePoint Server. So in my experience, I haven't seen too many people use or leverage SharePoint Server. Now, if you did want to use SharePoint Server, the flexibility is that the fields inside the, like any of the fields, I guess the easy answer is the flexibility is you can design and create pretty much any of your own workflows that you want. But the workflows are going to be managed inside SharePoint Server. So not sure if that answers your question, but you can, rather than just using the ones out of the box that come with it, you can design and create your own to have workflow tied in there, and that's going to be on a SharePoint server. So I do know over the years, not a lot of clients that I personally have worked with have gone to the extent of setting up SharePoint Server and then using the workflows, which is why I personally believe Microsoft, pushed them back in as functionality inside GP rather than having them outside as part of SharePoint Server. But if you are using Server, there is some setup in the background here where you're setting up your, let me just go under administration here, and then under workflow, you can actually define on your workflow side, there's going to be two workflows. There's going to be this workflow, and then I think it's on the system where you're going to tie it into SharePoint Server otherwise. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, then feel free to reach out to one of the people here, and we'll be able to give a little bit more detail on that. And I see somebody else has asked a question, is it possible to have two different functional currencies in GP? If not, is this something expected in the future? So in regards to the functional currencies, so what I'm assuming is that you're talking about the base currency for the company. So if I go into under my setup on GP, so if I just pop this open, I have my multi-currency window here, and you're going to see that the functional currency is set to, in my test company, it's set to US dollars. In regards to having two different functional currencies, in regards to currencies, you can have an unlimited number of currencies set up in your system, but you can only have one functional currency per company. So if you had two different companies, so there, let's say it was Canadian Corp and US Corp, each of them could have their own functional currency, but in terms of having a single functional currency, it's still just a single functional currency per company. But if you did have a drop down and had, one company was Canadian Corp and one company was US Corp, each one of those could be different functional currencies. As well, you can set up a relationship inside. So on my GL side, if I go down into my GL, so cards, financial, and account, what you're going to see here is under currency, you can set whether I can have multiple rates. So if you're trying to do a consolidation of different companies that have different currencies down to one single base, you can say that this GL account, so maybe I'm doing my assets, liabilities, so my balance sheet is looking one way with my capital assets being on a historical rate, and I think my assets and liabilities are on a spot rate, and then for my P&L, it's just or average rate. I could have that backwards, but either way, this is where I can set which rate type that I want to have on a account, and then when I set up my currency itself, I can say that that currency is tied to that rate type. So when I'm doing my translation for my consolidation, I would have the proper way of consolidating with historical, spot, and average rates. But in regards to your question, no, it's still just a single currency per company, but two different companies could have a different base currency.
One of the questions was, which version should we upgrade to? I think the best is probably talk to Trish or James based on your unique needs and have a two-way dialogue. But to let those know, GP 2015, R1 and R2, ends mainstream support in April 2020. So there are inherent risks of being on a non-supported version from Microsoft. Just means they're not releasing extra fixes, extra compatibility. And so any version before GP 2015, we do strongly recommend you update and upgrade. If you choose not to upgrade, Endeavour is still here to support you, and we'll be able to support you the best we can. And we do have some clients that are on older versions prior to 2015. And when it comes to an integration, I know our technical team work a lot of magic in terms of using the various tools out there to integrate external requests or workflows and moving data in and out of GP.
Yeah, I know we just did one working with an organization moving Salesforce. So all their orders and everything were managed in Salesforce. So the salespeople all lived in Salesforce. As soon as the order, quotes, all the quotes lived inside Salesforce. As soon as the opportunity was won, that quote actually got pushed into GP. They also built some workflow around it to say before that quote gets pushed into GP, it would create the customer in GP and it would put the customer on hold and send notification to finance, because ultimately finance should be the one to do the credit checks on the customer, because if you leave it up to the salesperson, they'll always say that we should be selling to that customer.
Looks like Kevin had a question. He's on GP 2015. What does the upgrade process entail? Again, talk to Trish. She'll work out a specific quote for you and talk about the process. At a high level, it's a two-step process. Endeavour, at the minimum, does a test upgrade using a pre-production server. Make sure everything works. You run a little bit of UAT testing. Run through some transactions on the test server, and then upgrade from 2015 into the production server. Then we test the reports and make sure all that works. That's at the minimum from a technical upgrade. Many clients also choose to have a planning session and open discussion with one of our consultants around features and functions that will help make their lives easier. So similar to what Marvin covered today, what are some of the feature and functions in the last few versions that may have been overlooked and would be to the betterment for your organization?
Just want to add to that, Scott. Having worked on I'll say a variety of different roles over the years, I've seen, I started working with Dynamics GP. Actually, at the time, it was called GPA, and it was called GPA DOS, so that really ages me. But over the years, I've seen a lot of different versions. So I remember back in the early 2000s, Microsoft was releasing, I think one version, I think it was version 6, had about 18 or 19 updates one year. Now, the upgrades from version 6 to 7 or 7.5 were, to say the least, painful, because there were so many updates, and the upgrades often broke because at that time it also ran on a couple different platforms. So SQL Server was one of them, but it also ran on B-Tree and C-Tree. So this is really aging me, giving this part. But because it was running on different platforms, there was so much different code and stuff that was happening in the background, that upgrades were, I'm going to say, a little more, I think the technical term is flaky. However, since Microsoft has acquired GP, which happened, I think, back in 2004 or 2008 or somewhere around there, they've changed it so that it's a SQL platform. They've spent a lot of time and resources to make the upgrade process really, really strong. So they've done a lot of testing on it. So in regards to the upgrades, well, the process now is actually, I will say, a lot smoother and a lot better.
Yeah, and along those lines, many of our upgrade quotes are actually fixed price now, just given the confidence and ease of doing the upgrades. And yep, happy to talk more offline as you move towards your evaluation. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. I see a number of you have stayed along to listen to some of these question and answers, and thank you for your continued interest and trust in Endeavour Solutions. We're here to help you in the long term. We're proud to be the largest Dynamics GP provider in Canada, and are continuing to invest in our GP practice as we do expand into other avenues as well. And thank you very much for your business thus far. We look forward to working with you in years to come. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Scott.